Hi, everybody, and welcome to the January 2022 Frequency Freaks Workshop. It's been a while since our last one, and I do apologize for that. As you can see from the scene behind me, Frequency Freaks HQ has moved, and that created a lot of disruption in our lives, and with everybody being busy with family stuff in the November-December timeframe, we just didn't have the opportunity to put a workshop together for you. However, we're back now, and we apologize for that delay, and we'll get on with this month's workshop and put all that stuff behind us. This month's workshop is the panel discussion this month is pretty exciting. We have an interesting group of people talking about granular synthesis. We did not limit the discussion to hardware-based granular synthesis only, and that made it, I think, a lot more interesting. Granular synthesis is something that I personally have been interested in since the mid-90s, if I remember right, probably around 1996. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'm thrilled that there are hardware methods for doing granular synthesis, and I use them myself. So it's a really cool technique. We do have some performances for you. And there aren't a lot this month, and I kind of wanted to touch on that. I wanted to encourage everybody to submit a performance. If you've never done a video recording of yourself performing, or if you've never performed in front of a live audience, that's okay. You don't have to be shy about it. In fact, it's probably easier to do it in your home studio, in your bedroom studio, or wherever you have your gear set up. Without anybody around you, because it's just a camera, and as soon as you start performing, you forget all about it. So I encourage everybody, no matter what your level of experience, to go ahead and record a performance video and submit it for our next workshop in February. The announcements for that will be coming out shortly, and they will be posted in all the usual places. You can subscribe to our mailing list from our website at www.freakfreaks.com. You can subscribe to our Facebook group on Facebook. Just look for Frequency Freaks there. We also have a Discord server. You can reach out to us through our website through the contact form, and we can add you to the Discord server that way. It is by invitation only, but we're not honestly that exclusive about it. So just send us a note and we'll get you on there. Yeah, sorry for the cut there. I completely screwed that bit up. So without further ado, on with the workshop. Please enjoy it. Please remember to like and subscribe, because that does help the channel and it helps the word get out about Frequency Freaks. I hope we can get together again soon in person. And if not, we'll just keep seeing you right here.
All right, here we are. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
So it's nice to get back to our regularly scheduled programming, or regularly monthly programming with a big team here. Maybe we'll just start with introducing ourselves and, what we're all about, at least in a musical context. So maybe let's start with you, Gabrielle.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm Gabrielle Couillard. I'm from Montreal. I live in Montreal. Been doing sound in theater and different kind of live shows, dance and variety live show. And I'm doing a master degree at UQAM in research creation. I work in complex sound specialization system, and with a lot of different ways to mix sounds together, from field recording, from recording of text, and all sort of things.
Wow, that's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Gabrielle and our next person that is going to introduce himself, thispatcher, are kind of our guests of honor this month. I mean, don't get me wrong, Paul and Scott, you're very honorable too, but these guys have a lot to say on this month's topic, which is granular synthesis and microsound. And so, yeah, maybe let's hear next from thispatcher. Oh, we lost your sound there.
What about now? Is it
That's
back?
better.
Okay.
Nice fade in.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is thispatcher, and I recently got a new mixing console, so I'm realizing that a fader does what a fader is supposed to do. Does it sound okay? The levels are fine?
Your levels are good, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. So my name is thispatcher. I perform primarily free improvisation on the modular synthesizer. It was something that I started out doing right away when I got a synth. I tried building a synth that I would pretty much only use with other people, and primarily without necessarily knowing what the other people were going to play or how they were going to play. So that was my constraint. I as far as specific to this topic today, I did a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Electroacoustic Composition at Concordia University in Montreal. So I was really early on exposed to listening to very short sounds and comparing their timbres. Maybe I won't speak too much more to that other than, I like really short sounds, and I like short sounds. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Well, next we have a regular with us at Frequency Freaks in the pre-COVID days at the live workshops we used to do, and now at all the monthly workshops. And it's always a pleasure to see and hear him and all the interesting things he has going, especially with iPads and things, which hopefully we have some of that this month to hear from. So let's hear from Scott McGregor more. Scott M2.
Hi. Well, I was hoping you'd call me next because when it comes to granular sounds, I like stretching things. So I like the opposite of the opportunity to take all these little granules and turn them into long, extending, subtle things. Because my main thing is ambient music, plus a little chill out and Berlin. But I'd say maybe 25% of my interest is in the little tick, 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 and 75% is in. So anyhow, it's a nice contrast to thispatcher. And the main project is called dreamSTATE. It's a duo with Jamie Todd. And but the modular side is more of a personal thing. Jamie has tons of virtual modulars. He delights in that. And he'd love to be able to
VCB rack and stuff.
Pardon me?
Like VCB rack and stuff.
Oh yes, yep. Yeah, he's got 4 or 5 of them. And then he enjoys mocking me because he can just go save and bring it back at any time. But I like the instantaneous aspects of modular and the ephemeral aspects. Although sometimes I have to leave a patch set up, for months until I've got it recorded properly. So anyhow, granular sound, I first was exposed to it back in early 90s when I was at a friend's studio, and he played me, hey, listen to this. And it was a female voice, and it was just, I was just overcome. It was so beautiful. And I didn't have the tools to do it until later on through iPads. And there's so many beautiful granular tools on iPads that I've delighted in. And now in the modular, there's some fantastic tools there too. So anyhow, that's.
So we'll call you maybe Rubber Band Man in this conversation then, if you're going to be stretching everything out.
Right.
So next person I want to hear from is a regular and somebody who's had a pivotal role, I think, in keeping Frequency Freaks going, other than Paul and myself. Scott's been just such a pillar to the post-pandemic life of this workshop. Can't thank him enough for what he's done, but let's hear him describe himself. Scott Lepore.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the glowing introduction, Michael.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been making music now for about 40 years, which doesn't actually by any means put me in the most experienced camp in this crowd, but definitely I've had a chance to explore so many different creative modalities, so many different instruments and tools. And in fact, I remember reading about sort of the initial discussions of granular synthesis and microsound in the MIT Computer Music Journal. I remember reading about that in the early 80s. I used to I'd save up all my money and I'd buy the Journal of Computer Music from MIT, and I would take it with me sort of everywhere I went. Most of the articles were sufficiently academic and sophisticated that, the theory went way over my head, but I knew something really important was coming with this. And when it arrived, nowadays it's, it really seems to be so popular. It's everywhere. It's, the basis of all time stretching and compression, that's in the vast majority of the software tools that we would use for recording things. It wouldn't surprise me if we found that, it was included in, television sets and other sort of home appliances, for shifting the pitch of sound up and down without changing the duration. But in any case, I have probably a dozen, granular tools in my arsenal, if you like, and absolutely adore Quantum. Quite frankly, I think if I had to pick a particular, sound engine, desert island sound engine, it would probably be granular, because it has the potential to, as Scott has suggested, but stretch things out and just really do amazing things in the time domain. And yet at the same time, as thispatcher is saying, it's also got the ability to do, incredibly precise focus on individual, elements of timbre. So it's really a wonderful tool, and something that I think that we'll see a lot more of as time goes by.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk a lot about that tool, and the kind of, I guess, subspecies of synthesis that come out of granular and microsound that this book Microsound talks about. And I'm really looking forward to picking each of your brains about the different ways you make music with this philosophy. So but before that, let's hear from our fearless leader. Next, we'll hear from Intrepita, otherwise known as Paul Stillwell, who is the founder of Frequency Freaks, and who, is the Gandalf of the group.
Yeah, that makes me feel old. Thanks.
Well, he fought like a demon or something, so that's pretty badass.
Yeah, he did. It was a pretty a Balrog, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm Paul, Intrepita. As far as granular synthesis has been part of my life since 1995 or 1996, when you just couldn't do granular synthesis in real time. I had probably a 486 or a very low-end Pentium at the time, running Linux. I downloaded Jean Pichet's Cecilia, which had been designed to run on Solaris, and I managed to get enough of it recompiled and working under Linux that I could use the granular engine, which was what I was after. And sometimes I'd have a render that would take 24 hours or so, but like Scott M2. My thing with it was taking, like a 5 or a 10-second sample and taking that and just stretching it out to 10, 15, 20 minutes, listening back to it, and then using that as the basis for a tape part for live improvisation. And that's how I did with that. As far as everything else is concerned, it's the rest of that's in my bio, I guess. We don't have to go into depth with that stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, we'll drop a bunch of links in the description for this, and people can go and check out the various projects that the different panelists have going on. I mean, I'm just to finish up the introductions real quick. I'm Michael Brooker, and I am one of the I guess admins at Frequency Freaks here, one of the sort of I guess, creative people that comes up with the ideas for some of the segments that we do, and just tries to get people together and get smarter people than me together so I can learn. But one thing I've been able to do in the synth community, and I've been really grateful that people find it useful, is that I've been able to create these documents and these kind of cheat sheets. I call them parameter grids because they're more than just single page sheets. They're documents that are designed to help people when they get a new module or a new piece of basically hardware. I don't think I've done anything on software yet, but I've done 22 documents so far, and we'll put a download link in the description for them, for all sorts of different modules and synths, just to help, especially with menu divey kind of digital modules like disting and the Eventide H9 and the Erica Synth's drum sequencer. These documents are just ways to help people get to making music faster. So instead of having to grab the manual to see, oh, where's the, like in Platts, for instance, oh, where is the polyphony algorithm? I got to go to page 5 of the manual, which is in the bottom of a pile of papers. Oh, I can just go to Michael's document. It's all one page. So I guess I'm sort of the encyclopedist, maybe the librarian of the group, that I like to put things into documents, make them simple and digestible so we can get to making art and get out of our manuals a little bit.
Well, and what I have to say, Michael, is that your disting, the work that you've done on disting, is entirely responsible for my ability to understand and use that module. Like your parameter grids are still on the top of my pile of documentation, my reference material when I'm working with it. It's just bam, right there. Your work has really been excellent. And if I remember correctly, you've had some commercial success with that as well, right? Didn't Erica want to utilize some of the work that you did in one of their product manuals?
Yeah, I was grateful to be able to get some paid work with Erica. Well, they paid me in modules, which was totally fine with me. They asked me to write the manual for the drum sequencer, so I did that. It was an interesting process working with Rival Vinovskis, who goes by Kodak, and he does most of their musical, I guess, demonstrations whenever they have a new synthesizer. He's the guy you see at Superbooth, making the banging techno out of whatever the latest drum machine or graphic VCO is that they come out with. And yeah, working with him has been great, and I still message him every so often, and they're just such a fantastic company. I can't say enough great things about Erica Synths, and working with them was a dream, So yeah, if you ever pop open the manual for a drum sequencer and either you love it or you hate it, both are my fault.
Good to know.
Yeah. But
It's
I guess
all Michael's fault.
Yeah. But let's get into maybe today's topic. I want to talk about granular synthesis and microsound and how that's different from some of the more traditional ways of synthesizing sound that we have. So, I guess the first way that most people come at synthesizers is through what's called subtractive synthesis, where we've just got these basic building blocks, an amplifier, an oscillator, a filter, and envelopes for those. And then other people come at it from sort of a sampling point of view where, or they come at music production from a sampling point of view where you're just kind of aggregating samples of things and turning that into a piece. But the way granular works is different from both of those. And so I'm interested, how do each of us interact with granular synthesis and microsound? Is there a preference for granulation, which would be kind of like, I think of it like smashing a mirror into a million pieces and then taking those pieces, rearranging them. And that mirror would be like a an audio sample, or particle synthesis, where you generate waveforms that only last like a couple milliseconds, and then you put like thousands of those together and turn that into a cloud of sound. Do you guys do one or the other, or both?
Personally, I've done both. The E370 is a wonderful module for doing that kind of thing with. I built an entire piece around it called Just a Drop that was based, all the sounds that were based off of a sample that I made of a single drop of water in the kitchen sink coming out of the tap and hitting the sink. And I put that into the E370 editor, split it up over all the samples they gave you, which I think is 64 or 128. I can't remember.
64, I think.
Yeah, and I used that as the basis for two of the oscillators and made a complete piece around that using clouds, just E370 and clouds, and a sequencer.
All based around one sample.
Yep.
So wavetable on Granular.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Gabrielle?
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to jump on, but I'm curious to hear the answer to that question.
Oh, I actually missed the question.
Wavetable on Granular?
Yeah, kind of. You take a sample, you split it up, you slow the sound. I mean, once they're into a wavetable, you're slowing them down. The resolution for doing that within the E370 is just amazing. So it's kind of particles, it's kind of Microsound, it's kind of Granular. It's not really any of them, but it's kind of all of them. And it just results in some really cool sounds. I don't have the E370 anymore, but I still have that track. And then, going into more of the granular side of things, I love the time stretching aspect, and also being able to alter pitch. And if we get into talking about more pop music, I think these technologies are what's used. I'm not absolutely 100% positive, but I'd suspect that these technologies are used in auto-tune as well. It certainly sounds like it.
Yeah, I think anytime you want to change the length of a recorded piece of audio and keep the pitch the same, you're involving some sort of granular synthesis in that, some sort of algorithms at play there.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, or vice versa, altering the pitch without altering the time.
Yeah, and thispatcher, now, do you, we heard from Paul in sort of the granulation aspect of taking a sample and chopping it into a million pieces and rearranging it, but do you ever do anything with like particle synthesis?
And I saw in the document you sent around, and I've heard you refer to it as particle synthesis, but
maybe I'm using the wrong term.
No, maybe I'm not familiar with the term. So could you define it first, and I'll see if I can go with it.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about Microsound more globally as a way of dealing with very short samples and using thousands of them in a row to create some longer sound, right? But then I think of approaching that from either the sampling point of view, where we take something longer, smash it into a million pieces, and then rearrange, or we build up from particles, which Curtis Rhodes talks about particles like these novel waveforms that you generate inside of a computer that only last a few milliseconds. So you can draw them out. And then each of those tiny or very short duration waveforms can have parameters on them, like an amplitude envelope. Different kinds of envelopes, obviously different waveform shapes. And you can multiply them in times 2000 or something, and then apply envelopes to the larger structure. Do you ever do that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I guess maybe working backwards, work with lots of little tiny pieces that you're shooting in. I think I've heard of that referred to as like working with grain guns. Like you have a number of different emitters of tiny little grains that you're stacking perhaps on top of each other, and you're playing with the spread in terms of time. Are they overlapped? Are they at the same time? Maybe you're playing with the length of the grains. You're playing with the window in each grain. For Maximus P, there was a really great set of library. Alex Harker's Sample Accurate library, I think is what it was called. And in particular, it was like the dynamic DSP stuff that was really useful. So I was playing with that a lot about 5 or 6 years ago, making Maximus P patches that was dealing with, in that case, particle synthesis. And then I guess also, like I've also played a lot with, was the other example with live input or with still playing with samples?
Yeah, so I'm thinking either we're taking a sample and breaking it up, or we're taking a more of a theoretical waveform and building it up.
I see.
Into a cloud of something bigger.
Yeah. And in terms of taking a sample and breaking it up, absolutely. And I think you're going to link to it in the YouTube stream, but I went back and looked at all my compositions that I've released and annotated each one that has Microsound elements in it. And so there's a couple pieces in, I think, Early Electroacoustic Works #2, the album that I released, where I'm using, and in one as well, where I built a PD patch that is taking samples that I recorded around Montreal, chopping them into tiny little pieces, and then sequencing them, but sequencing them at really, really fine short lengths of them to create sort of larger textures from it. So yeah, I've done both. Not so much recently. I haven't worked with sampling so much recently, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And if I may add, just really quick, that working with Pure Data or Maximus P or a programming language, so defining the instrument while composing it is actually a big part of it for me anyway. Yeah. But Scott, sorry, you were going to say?
Sorry, thispatcher. I was going to just ask, how did you sequence them? Was it a sort of a traditional, MIDI, DAW-based sequencer? It strikes me that might have trouble getting the kind of fine timing that you were looking for. The grid might not be high enough resolution, so I'm kind of curious to know.
Yeah. Well, it was all written in Pure Data, so if my memory serves me, it probably wasn't super careful about playing to a grid.
Sure.
But I approached it like every 16th time this particular gun was going to fire of this sampler, and then playing with how many times within that, what are subdivisions of that, and then running them at a really, really fast clock speed.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So in that sense, a sequencer, but not in the mesotemporal time.
Right.
Yeah.
More a sequence of triggers for the different events, the granular events.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you use, were you using, musical time, like a musical time signature, or was it more in terms of clock time, like milliseconds or microseconds?
I don't remember, but I want to say more the latter in terms of clock time, I think. Yeah. I think more in terms of clock time, but I think pretty steady. Yeah. The piece in question was Laundromatic Writing and Iron Harvest are the two pieces in particular that we're using this. Yeah.
Check those out.
Yeah.
I would be curious to compare the Microsound you got from Montreal to those I got when I first started too, because I think, well, personally, I work mostly from samples, and I remember the first time I touched a Microsound, I was a baby in audio, and I had those great recording of the subway, and in Montreal with the, if you ever came in Montreal, came in Montreal, you probably heard the do from the. Yeah, exactly. And working with building that, I did kind of my own library of Microsound from that sound. I was really a baby. I didn't know granular tools were a thing. I was in Pro Tool and I just started building like those tiny sample from that sample, just doing all transformation I could, and ended up with the big library of sound that were coming from that and arranging them. So I guess, yeah, there's a way to discover Montreal to Microsound probably.
Is that it, Gabrielle? Do you make that library available, or is it more your personal collection?
No. I honestly, that's a thing that I know it still exists, but it's a very old Pro Tools session when I was still a student in bachelor degree years ago, and I know it exists. I know I could find it back, but I wasn't good at Archival at that time, so I have the final piece, but not the sample.
Yes.
But I
It'd
work.
be lovely to hear, right? The sound of the Montreal subway, and beyond just the chimes, right? The sound that the trains make with those rubber wheels. Again, if anybody hasn't been to Montreal, the subway system, unlike Toronto and many other major cities, it doesn't run on steel wheels. It runs on rubber tires, and so the trains are much quieter, but also somehow more sonorous. As they pull into the station, they have a sort of a humming sound that sort of decreases in pitch gradually, and it almost sucks, the audio, all the rest of the audio in as the train pulls in, and as it accelerates out, it's sort of you hear the motors as well as the resonance of the tires. So it's a very, very rich sonic environment.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And the do you hear used to be a thing that transformation was doing in the machine. And when they changed the metro, they used the recording of that sound because Montrealers were too used to it. So it's no longer a natural sound.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of iconic sound you get, and
absolutely.
super cool to work with, because when you start to either slow them or speed them, you get something totally different. Well, which is the concept of Microsound, I get, but
yeah, I think of it like it's more involved than this, but sort of an analog in like lyric writing or poetry is sort of like when somebody like David Bowie used to take a newspaper and chop out words and just put them all in a hat and then just arrange, if he had a creative block, just sort of lay them all out on the floor and think, oh, that's an interesting word combination. Oh, I wonder if I can write some music to that or something, just as a different way to stimulate creative output, But in terms of like contrasting approaches, I know Scott, too, you, instead of dealing with very short durations, like you said, you like to deal with longer time scales. You really stretch things out. So, and you also do a lot with iPads and software tools. So, tell us a little bit about your approach.
Okay, with iPads, I've picked up a number of the Granular programs because there's one by one, there's become quite a library of possibilities there. But I found my main focus is on iDensity and Borderlands, and they have.
These are apps.
They're both apps, yes, and like all the Granular tools on iPad, I find each one has its own personality, and those two in particular are almost divergent. Borderlands is unique to the iPad environment because you can bring in sound waves, and then you have your like a little voice you could drop onto it, move it across, and pick any part of the sound wave. And within that, you can dial in from 1 to 128, almost like recording heads, says bip, 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 and you can pick the scale of where they go within that, how fast they go, whether there's any pitch variations, and it's a wonderful tool, and it's all run by your fingers. You can't apply a controller to it or anything, so it's all very much in the moment, or you spend a lot of time setting it up and then save that, and it's just, I find it's a lot of fun. You get some unexpected elements depending on what you feed it. You can even feed it real-time materials and just work with it as it's streaming in. And iDensity, it's quite interesting. It's got up to 6 different windows, and within those windows, you've got your main head, and you can adjust like the width of the granulation, the length, the density, the pitch, and apply randomization to any of those. And that one's quite interesting because you can apply MIDI controllers to it. So I map all my favorite aspects to controllers, and I can just dial things in and out on 4 different streams just very, very easily. My favorite tool is this DJ Tools MIDI twister. And so you can just keep, that's pitch or duration, and bringing in the jitters and things like that. So you've got something that's fairly stable, and then suddenly it's, you can expand how far it's going to go. It's a wonderful real-time tool once it's mapped to controllers. So that's my personal ones I'm most drawn to, but there's other ones like Quanta and Tardigrade that other people are in love with. And then when I first started getting into modular, through clouds and some other aspects, I was saving up for the larger granular tools like the Nebula and Morphogene. Someday I'll get the Instro one, but
the
I haven't got them yet. Aardbar, yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty penny for sure. All those Instro ones, but they're built to the utmost precision and beauty. They're true products because they're just they're tanks. Every Instro thing.
I just wanted to touch on Borderlands for a second because I'm pretty sure I know that I've played with it. I've played with iDensity as well. I like them both, and if I remember right about Borderlands, you're not limited to bringing in one sample file. You can put sample files pretty much wherever you want on your screen, and you can have them actually crossing over so that if your sample head happens to pass over the intersection, it will pick up pieces from both files. Did I get is that the right one?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that the right application? Yeah, I thought so. That's a really cool aspect of that one too. So you can start combining your samples in some pretty unusual ways with that.
Mm-hmm.
Get some really cool results that way.
And that seems to be the way you go from streams into clouds of grains and clouds of sound.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's useful to start out by thinking about it as just a single stream of grains if you're trying to kind of understand microsound and granular at a beginner level, at an intro level. But then this idea of stacking the streams on top of each other, and that's where we get into this parameter of density and how dense something is and where those densities are coming from, what part of the frequency spectrum, things like that.
Is there a sort of an accepted definition of the properties of a grain?
Probably in Microsound, if I hop through it for a minute, if you guys
What
talk
I seem
amongst
to
yourselves, I
recall
can
it was
find it.
up to 100 milliseconds. But I was kind of curious to know, is everybody here a purist about that? If you go over 100, is it, no longer a grain?
There are many tools that seem to drive granular synthesis beyond the realm of grains in that definition. Nebula certainly does. Clouds does as well. Cosmos, which I just received a couple weeks ago, it does that as well. I'm trying to remember, it's because it's been a while since I've played around in Cecilia, but I don't think you can go that far with it in Cecilia in terms of the length of the grains. There is a window that you can play with, which is what the grain, like a window in time, which is what the grains are confined to in terms of where they will take their samples from. So as you're going through your sample in time, you will, your grain samples are restricted to that window, so that as your window moves along the time path, then you're getting the sounds that are appropriate to that part of the time path.
So that's a selection frame, is it? So the grains are smaller, but what you're saying is it picks it from within a narrower frame, not from the overall sample.
Yeah. And there are two ways to control that. You can either define a window size, or you can just increase your randomization factor, right? By increasing your randomization factor, you're effectively saying, okay, I want randomization, but I only want it to go this far. Or maybe I want it to go this far. Or maybe I want it to go this far.
I think I'd read that's, I think the rather prosaic expression for that, I think, is called spray range. That's what I'd heard, is that the area from which, the distance from which your grains will be selected is called the spray range.
Sure,
The
that works
distance
too.
Yeah, I think different tools use different terminology for the similar functions.
Yeah.
Like on not Borderlands, iDensity, they would call it jitter. So the same thing. It just sprays it around.
Yeah.
I've seen some other tools that use other terminology for it.
You have the great free tool Granular that just called it the start point. And you can just define if the start point is actually the start of the file, or if it's later, or if it's randomized. And it's just the terms in Granular are very Granulab are very instinctive. You cannot get lost in it.
But that question of how long is a grain gets into this idea of timescales, which I think is really usefully addressed in the Microsound book, the Curtis Rhodes book. That maybe I want to hear. It sounds like thispatcher has something to chime in on about this, but I want to bring in this visual example a little bit later, I think.
Sorry, what is the prompt?
Oh no, it just sounded like you wanted to say something based on what we were just talking about.
Oh, I mean, I guess where my mind is going is in the digital domain, I'm wondering whether the length of a sample is the shortest theoretically we could think of in terms of microsound. In terms of, and maybe not, if that can be heard, I suppose it can. And then maybe as far as the longest that it can be, yeah, I would imagine that is in part dependent on the system you're using, perhaps dependent on your cultural framing of what you think is a short sound. So yeah, I would say given the sort of the length that I've heard thrown around, which is maybe on the upper ends of 100 milliseconds, but I'd throw an asterisk at the end of that and say but.
If I could add, maybe it depends what kind of sound you're working for and what kind of goal you fix. Because I work a lot with words, with people speaking, and there's certain texts that are very good to take and to granulate, but it means that you have to take very big grains. Like it has to be a few seconds. It's not millisecond, but those few seconds composing and recomposing themselves will create a new text through granular synthesis. But then a small grain with words is not a few milliseconds. Right. It's a few seconds. It's very different. Though the effect is amazing, and you can totally go into what you were saying about David Bowie taking words out of at. Well, you get this effect directly.
Yeah, and if I may respond to that, I think what's also helpful to think about is that this, like when we say the length of the sound, maybe the sample itself is, say, 2 seconds long, but maybe you can think about micro adjustments to that sound. So maybe the first 10% of that sound runs through this filter, and then the next 10% of the sound runs through that filter. And so even though the sample is at a certain length, you could be making micro adjustments to it, perhaps. So I think, yeah, so modulation could be in the microtime domain, but what you're working with might not be.
Yeah.
That, Gabriella, or Gabrielle, I should say, sorry. You reminded me of a wonderful composer who I discovered probably in and around the 1994, 1995 time frame. His name is Barry Truax, a Canadian composer. He has a wonderful album called Song of Songs, in which he uses poetry, his kids beating on pots and pans in the kitchen, and all kinds of different things, church bells, And the whole album is just built around granular synthesis and granular resynthesis. It really is an amazing piece of work. So if you get the opportunity to take a listen to that, I highly recommend it.
It's on my list. Thank you for.
If you can't find it, I can help you with that.
Thank you. I'll take note of it.
Yeah, these time scales are kind of cool. I think maybe just to show people a little bit of small visual from the Curtis Rhodes book. Yeah, cool. Okay, so these are the time scales of music according to Curtis Rhodes. So on the left we have basically the longest duration that any phenomenon could ever be. And then going to the right all the way into the infinitesimal, which is like just a theoretical duration, basically as short as it's a point in time. It has no width, it has no duration. It's just like, you can think of it like a Planck length of something that's like the shortest anything could possibly be in physics, then everything else in between. And so the sample itself that thispatcher was saying, yeah, I think most people are dealing at 44.1 kilohertz sample rate or 48 kilohertz, something like that, getting longer as sound cards get better. But yeah, it says here 44.1 to 192. That's sort of, I guess, the shortest we can meaningfully deal with, unless you're doing stuff with aliasing, which you can, but I think that's starting to get a little more like implied than obvious in the sonic implications of it. But yeah, Microsound's sort of here. And I don't know if there's durations at 10 milliseconds. He's defining a sound object, which is a note. So anything that you could write as a dot on a piece of manuscript as starting at 50 milliseconds. But it is arbitrary, but I find this chart useful in framing different domains of time.
Yeah, and I think if you don't mind putting your mouse over where it says comb filter, for example, or in that range, it's around 10 millisecond to 1 millisecond range. If I was to take the module that I use the most for Granular or Microsound these days, which is the Make Noise Mimeophone, I think a great example of sort of going quickly from one area of the Microsound time domain to another would be to, let's say, bring the repeats almost up to full and the zone all the way to the left, which is sort of really, really, really short sample time. You're basically sort of doing, I guess, quasi-Karplus-Strong synthesis. So it's really, really, really fast. Creates this really, really nice sort of resonant tone. But then if you slowly sort of smear the zone into slower time, you start to hear those windows stretched out. But I think, so I think it's for me anyway, when I first started learning about this kind of stuff, thinking about filters and delays as sort of occupying the same axis can be really, really, really helpful. Bit of a mind blown in my case anyway.
Elaborate a little bit on that. I'm curious to know what you mean by
that.
Sorry, specifically what you're saying is the filter, for example, is sort of a take on this, and I'm curious if you could kind of expand on that.
Yeah.
In what way is it?
I'll try my best. I mean, if you take a sound and you double it and then you shift it in time by say 1 millisecond, you will get a bit of a filter effect on it. Right. This the way that the phase relationships are acting on each other. So, but I guess if you start to shift that phase, shift the alignment of that phase enough, you might start to hear it more like a delay. So it's all that you're changing is the relationship of phase, and eventually, I guess if you stretch it out far enough, it's many phases apart. Then you start to hear it as an echo. That's really what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that in that sense.
Sort of thus back to the point that you were making about, or the focus you were drawing to the comb filter concept. So phase cancellation sort of represents a microsound, an aspect of microsound, I guess is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's I guess as a result, yeah, it's Yeah, I think I'm thinking about it in terms of its relationship to displacement and time. Yeah.
And this, I think I'll maybe stop sharing in a second and come back to this later, but I really like this division here of conscious time, the present, that's the idea that on average, we are perceiving everything at 600 milliseconds in the past. Everything we see, hear, and perceive is actually, there's latency with human perception, right? We're not here in real time, or at least we're not understanding real time. We're understanding 600 milliseconds roughly of any event in our lives.
Is that what you're saying, that we're hearing everything with a 600 millisecond delay?
Yeah. We're hearing what we're hearing happened 600 milliseconds ago.
That seems like a long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's like it or lump it.
I guess our brain adjusts to it so that we don't feel it, but but latency is always an issue, just like we've been experiencing for the last 2 years of pandemic, the latency issues. Me and Michael working in telematic, it has been like the whole goal, but that's a whole other subject, I guess.
That's true.
Well, we're filming this on a Saturday, and my brain feels like it's at a much higher latency than it should be.
I get you.
So I'm interested, we talk mostly about software in the granular space, and I think that's mainly because making music in this way is very computationally intensive. Like, it requires a lot of data and information to be crunched at any given moment in time. But, are there any pieces of physical equipment that you guys use that can take advantage of this type of stuff, whether they be modules or outboard synths or any physical hardware piece that you use to make granular microsound?
Well, we've mentioned a bunch of them already, right? You've got Nebula, you've got your Mimeophone, there's Clouds, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the new Clouds. Beats, thank you.
Beats,
yeah. The one that I don't have, for me, most of them don't really come far enough. They're interesting to use live, but they don't come far enough in terms of the sonic textures that I'm after when I'm really thinking granular. So for me, I kind of need like if I was working in Cecilia, I'd be saying I need at least 75 grains, not 8. And that has to do with the number of sounds that are firing at the same time. And
a density of 75, not 8.
Yeah. And most of the hardware seems to be limited to 8. I think the ER301 might be an exception, and Scott, maybe you can speak to that.
If memory serves, and I haven't checked the latest firmware, but I think that the granular module was 16 simultaneous, involves 16 simultaneous, as does the Waldorf Iridium as well. It has a maximum of 16 grains. It refers to grains as particles. That's the language that they use. It may be a bit regionalized as well. I think when I've read texts on Microsound from European authors, they tend to refer to grains as particles. So in any case, it's 16 as well. And some of the other tools, one of my favorite tools is the polyend tracker, and it actually includes a granular synth in there, but it only has a single grain. But it's remarkable how much you can actually do with such a limited set. I think it really comes down to, of course, and this is what I found historically, the best microsound creations, in my opinion, have been produced by the most interesting source material. So Gabrielle, I think what you're talking about with, the spoken word would be fascinating. I've never really thought to explore that particular area. But certainly, and Scott, you may have seen this as well with some of the default patches that come with, Borderlands, some of the default waveforms, is they evolve remarkably over, vocal samples juxtaposed with, horns and noise and this kind of thing. So when you move around, you really have a broad source palette to granularize.
Yeah, that's something that I started playing around with a couple of years ago, is getting more intentional with the source material that I was using. Previously, I would go out and I would do field recordings, and I would use those, and they would give really interesting results. But at the same time, I found that if I'm trying to do something that's more tonal, I could get more controllable results by just playing a synth and then granularizing that. If you want to fit things into the palette of a chord structure, you can play a bunch of chords on a pad and record that, and then you can granularize that, and you get some interesting sounds that way as well. More controllable because you're taking full control over the whole process.
I think I take maybe opposite to that, which is I am in control, but maybe I don't want to be as in control of the finer details when I'm playing live. So I think, at least in the hardware context, sticking with a single delay, maybe two, as my only hands-on to Microsound, at least with taking live sampled sound. I try not to. Yeah, I guess having that constraint in a live context is really useful. But I can certainly say that, like, having looked at not Cecilia, but for example the Composer's Desktop. I think Composer's Desktop project was the Trevor Wishart, I think, software, which had lots of control over all the different parameters. That's certainly really enticing. But I think I'm more driven to being in a high wire sort of live context and being forced to come up with something really quickly and something in response to what someone else is doing. And so just using one module with 8 parameters, maybe 7 parameters, is keeps me happy enough, I guess.
Certainly live, yes.
Certainly live,
I would agree with you totally for doing live.
Yeah.
I guess for live, my goal, my research is to find the best sample I can use, that I have less manipulation to make, that I can just let go of control because I know it's going to work in any way the software decide to use it. I can put basic parameter and start working on something else to transform that granulation that is made. So I guess my goal is always to find the best sample to granulate that will have the best result, in which I have the less input to put to get a good result, to get something good to work on. So yeah, sample can be very important.
That seems like
I found that there's a universe to be explored. Just even from a relatively mundane recording, I had built a granular synth on the ER301, and I added attached it to one of these slider boxes, these 16 slider boxes, similar to what you're talking about, Scott, with your knob box there. And even a 5 or 10 second long sample, you can spend exactly. That's exactly the box. And the number of grains, the start location of each grains, the amount of jitter or LFO, random LFO movement within each grain during its lifespan. But truly, a 10-second sample, slowed down, sped up, manipulated in various other ways. Hours and hours of wonderful, sonorities come out of it, and it kind of makes me think that, with that and a microphone, you arguably that could be all you need, right?
I'll go further than that. And one of my recent preoccupation was, well, a thing with field recording is to go and do sound walk. And I cannot walk a lot. I have a small disability. So usually what I do is that I stand at a certain place and try to find the best recording at that spot. And recently I took like an hour long recording. So there's not much happening. It's pandemic time. Nighttime is really boring. But I put the recorder out for an hour and I took that and I speeded up. And working through that hour of nearly nothing, but sometimes just a tiny bit, and granulating a lot of like having a lot of grain, playing high speed in something where it seems like nothing happened suddenly becomes something very interesting. So maybe the base of your granulation can be much bigger because it does choose little sample through that, but I give to the machine an hour long of what seems to be nothing and I get something pretty cool out of it. So
But there is room tone there, right? Like the world always has an ambient sound, and I imagine that if you were to compress that recording, it would obviously shift the pitch of that up, and all of a sudden you're hearing something that we're not.
Not only that, but if you
designed
just but if you just sit somewhere for an hour, there's a lot of sound that's going to
True.
happen.
Yeah, especially in the city.
It's just not exciting to listen to for an hour.
That reminds me a lot of when they pointed the Hubble telescope at this like 1-inch part of the sky where they thought nothing was there, but they pointed it at it for, I don't know, 3 weeks, and it ended up being something called the Hubble Deep Field Image, where we saw thousands of galaxies, where it's like just this idea that there's way more going on than you realize. And sometimes we just need sophisticated enough tools to help us realize just how beautiful and complex every square inch of our universe is,
Well, that's actually a really interesting analogy too, because that particular image is not just looking at an area that we thought was empty. It's actually looking back in time, because the light we're seeing is billions and billions of years old.
Yeah, and a lot of those galaxies might have merged since then, and some of them definitely have because they're far enough away, or they might have like disappeared entirely. And but it's all duration, and that's, I guess, this thesis I'm trying to build up with this, the reason for this granular discussion. I don't really have the right words for it yet, but just this idea that like all of sound and all of light, it's all just different time scales and things reverberating and oscillating at different rates,
Yeah.
Like, what do you guys think about that? I know it's pretty meta, but
I mean, I think that very much is at the heart of it, right? I mean, our auditory perception is relatively small in terms of, the time domain, right? 20 hertz to 20K. Not that I can come close to either of those extremes, but so now we take, we use these powerful tools to take, drastically different time domains than we're capable of naturally experiencing, and bring them all down within that auditory framework. And it really is quite profound, because what you can discover in that, as you were saying, Gabrielle, an hour of time of just ambient sound in the city sped up becomes something, quite, entirely different, right? So I think this is tremendously, tremendously powerful and tremendously deep. The question is, how do we map or explore, or even arguably, discuss that? We sort of need a new language, a new way of what, other than performing it. We need a new way of referring to it. Maybe that's what Curtis Rhodes is really trying to do with the Microsound text.
Yeah, and maybe that's what Elon Musk is trying to do with brain-machine interface. The fact that like words kind of just fail, and like our kind of evolutionary this like meat helmet that we have of like, it's pretty limited, the perceptual array that we have at our disposal. We need better tools, basically, in order to understand more subtle aspects of reality.
Deep.
Yeah.
Just to step back a moment in time and space, Gabrielle, when you took your hour field recording and sped it up, with your tools, did you keep it at approximately the same pitch, or did you allow the pitch to rise as well?
I did both actually. I used this tool called a Mangle where I have power to just decide, do I want to change the pitch or put an LFO on the pitch, so each grain will have a different pitch and things like that. Not just LFO, but there's a lot of ways to manipulate this. And I did both. And actually it's super interesting to not change the pitch, because you then discover something different from still close to what you heard. But if you decide to change the pitch slightly between the grains, you start to have a symphony coming out of your backyard.
Nice.
Which is, both are interesting. I think it's a shift in perspective. I think it's super interesting to just take the time to discover perspective you didn't know you had, or you didn't know could be shared by someone else. So yeah, I think it's maybe not clear what I'm trying to say, but for me it was really helpful to start to think, well, I don't have to go sound walk to discover those big pieces of landscape around me, because the landscape can in a way come to me too if I just take the time to listen to them.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, you can find like enlightenment that way too. That just the idea that like you don't have to go to India or go to a temple, or like it's in your house. It's in the room that you're in right now. It's just about adjusting your perception to it and being like opening up the floodgates long enough for an hour, or pointing your telescope for 3 weeks at the same image to see that it's been there all along.
exactly, yeah. And like recently I had the chance to go right by the ocean, and to have the sound of water for 20 minutes is also a super interesting experience with grains, because you can discover something, like you can build a tempest out of the single sound of the waves, which is, well, as someone doing sound for theater and dance and things like that, where experience is great, but also you have a goal, a precise goal. It's super interesting to find ways to build unnatural, well, fictional spaces out of real spaces.
Yeah,
And
that
grains
gets
are a bit
into
of that.
and that gets into convolution a little bit too. Like, do you guys ever deal with like convolution reverb at all? Like thispatcher, do you ever convolve different like spectrum together so it sounds like, so you make one sound like it's coming from the space of the other sound?
Yeah, I've done a bit of that. I think like generalized cross synthesis, I think, was the technique, or I don't know if it was audio mosaicing. That might be something else. But yeah, I've done a little bit of that in software. I've never done anything with it in hardware. Was someone going to say?
I was going to say, is your resynthesis the panharmonium might be sort of indirectly related to that, right? Is it a reinterpretation of the input sound? Yeah, that's it's funny that you're the one to ask me that, Scott. Yes, I bought that from Scott a couple of years ago. It's a module that analyzes the spectrum and then resynthesizes it using a bank of oscillators. So I suppose in that sense, I'm doing something kind of close to convolution. But I don't know. I'm trying to think about this. Yeah, I think like the last time I did anything close to cross synthesis or convolution was probably using like the Michael Norris Spectral Magic plugins, which are free and super cool. And that was also something that I was using for that, I guess. Yeah. So I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but Octavian, maybe what you can do is explain what is convolution. It's a term that I've heard thrown around, and I'm understanding a little bit by inference here, but is there a succinct explanation that you can give us?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can give you the like elementary school definition, because that's about as far as I go with it.
So that's
please.
great.
After I just
Yeah.
spoke about it for a couple minutes, if you wouldn't mind, that'd be great.
Well, like at least all I know about it is from reading this Microsound book in my regular sort of reading interval that I have before bed each night. So, take it with that. But convolution is basically you're multiplying the spectrum. So you're multiplying the amplitude of, like, you take a sound, take the spectrum of a sound, and you multiply the spectrum of one sound onto another. So you map them together, and there's different like algorithms that they can use to do that. But what the end result is after all that math, and they use these things called like fast Fourier transforms or like short time Fourier transforms and stuff, which I have no idea what they are, but they look cool like when they're in a graph. But what the net result ends up being is you can have one sound from somewhere sound like it is occurring in another place altogether. So they take.
Is it a space, or is it the actual sound itself that changes in quality, like in character?
Well, they take, like, you can take these impulse responses, they're called, and they're like short blips that you can go to a venue, let's say your favorite church or your favorite cave. I've got at least 4 or 5 caves that I love, but and I can send like I can have a tape recorder, a Zoom, and I can have something that goes like bop, and then record that, and you record the reverb, the echoes that come back, and then you take any other sound from your sample library, and through the magic of convolution and math and smarter people than all of us, you can make that sample sound like it happened in that cave, and that's convolution reverb.
Yeah, and I've heard of convolution reverb and the impulse response recordings and this kind of thing. I think they use that as well these days as well in amp sims for guitar, for virtual guitar amp simulations and things like that for guitar effects, right? So.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So
it's basically a mathematical transformation of a waveform into, based on a complex input to bring properties of the second impulse or the second waveform to use to transform the first waveform.
Yeah, and I think the original kind of idea of it was that they merge, that it's not one going into the other, or it's not like a leader-follower relationship. It's more of it's a merger. So they become this new organism, kind of like how, like, when a virus enters a cell, it's no longer a virus, nor is it a cell. It's a virocell is a new thing. So yeah, but I could be speculating all of that, but I don't know, it sounded right. So where are we going to go with it? Yeah, I look forward to hearing.
These sessions are as much about imagination as they are about facts, right? What we do is about vision as much as hard technical information. So let's face it, the idea that you presented may actually be different than any textbook definition, but it's quite likely more interesting and inspiring in itself.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Is like, yeah, are we inspired? Are we having fun? And I'm really looking forward to, on the rest of this workshop, hearing the musical contributions that people have, particularly for people that submitted things this month in the Granular Microsound context, because we can talk about it all day, but hearing what people have going on in their heads is a totally different thing. And yeah, I can't wait. So, thanks everybody for joining me on this panel, for sharing your experiences and sharing the way that you work with this amazing synthesis type. It's been a blast. So hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having
Thanks
us.
for the invite.
Thanks. Have
Thanks.
a great day.
Take care.
Hey, Frequency Freaks. So I just wanted to provide a brief update on where we're at with the undo lead sheet. So you can see there's been a lot of additions made, but just for context, I'll just show a still from last month's score image. So, you know, we just had, like 9 staves and or staves. And they weren't labeled. I knew what they were sort of mentally, but they, you know, it definitely would have helped to label them, and just not a lot going on. Definitely more of a lead sheet. I'm still calling it a lead sheet, but at this point, it's more of an arrangement. So from 6 staves, we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 18. So 3 times the number, and there's clear labels now, which, you know, for this number of for this much traffic, you gotta name your lanes for sure. So the main voice still is the Bjork voice, and what I plan to do is try to notate some of the phasing that she's doing in her in the post-production on her track. And then there is another mezzo soprano that comes in later as part of this choir that I noticed on the live video. That is a counterpoint. So it's the altos sometimes have counterpoint, or they sometimes sort of duplicate what Bjork's doing. So, you know, and then we've got a couple flutes which come in later. It's much more orchestral than I originally thought. Also, a big difference is that these, you know, intervallic lines that come in pretty early are actually handled by the harp. I thought they might be strings at first, but then, you know, with closer inspection, it's obviously the harp. But the strings will sort of double that later on and do some different things. So in terms of the score, I haven't added much content, but just cleaned things up a little bit, added timestamps all over the place. And I actually came up with a full form. So the formal structure now is fully laid out from start to finish with timestamps, which is going to help me a lot when I go back to continue transcribing, because what I'm doing is grabbing all the notes off of the original using a program called Transcribe, which I love. And, you know, it is a paid piece of software, but it's really excellent. I think it's only like $40 or $50 for a license, and it's a lifetime license. But, you know, you can start, stop, and easily set timing intervals and set markers here and switch between the markers. You can EQ things, you know. It's just a really great tool if you're trying to transcribe stuff. So what I will do now is just play you where it's at as a refresher. And here we go. Okay, so I just wanted to give a brief update here on some of the sound design and things that are going on with Undo from last time. So I've got a couple notes here off the side, but so I guess what I'll do initially is just show you where it's at. We've got the same amount of time listed, or same amount of time programmed in as I did before, but I added drums and fixed up some of the sound design and things. So I will just show you what's up. So that's where the piece overall is at. I'm thinking the drum level might be a bit low, but can adjust that for next video. Just wanted to show some of the sounds that were arrived at. So what I'll do is just start with showing the originals. And so this is the unedited kick. And I suppose what we'll do maybe is just have a quick listen to a clip from the original track, just so you can hear what I'm trying to get close to. There's some EQing on it, so here's what it sounds like without EQ. It's like a marching band bass drum kind of, but what I was trying to do is grab from drum machines, right? And these are all kick drum emulations, which is kind of different than than like a stand-up kind of marching band, you know, or orchestral bass drum. But this is the original, and it comes from an emulation of an Ace Tone Rhythm Ace FR1. And then the version that I arrived at after some sound design. There's a lot more reverb on it. Fast delay with a bit of a mount dialed in. It really helps give it some front end, I find, compared to. Well, I mean, the front end on there is pretty good, but it's very clearly a drum machine kick drum, and I wanted to turn that into kind of an orchestral bass drum. So. It's sort of my best approximation at it. Next is a rim shot. So there is a rim. This is the original. And it's from just a basic 808 emulation. Yeah. So short, classic rim sound. But again, this whole track has a lot more reverb on it and a lot more orchestral feeling to it. There's a lot more sort of ambience and venue in the sound. So what I tried to do with the sort of low rim shot was, so again, using that fast delay and using more reverb. I think there's some bit crushing or decimation or something happening here at in this effect, but yeah. So once again, from that to this. Now with the third one, sort of a high rim shot. This is an emulation of a Kit 8. What is that? Sequential Circuits drum tracks emulation. This is meant to be sort of a higher rim, and there's two pitch levels to it in the track. So I pitch it up in general quite a bit, and then I pitch it up even more for that high rim. So this is sort of like medium high rim. This sound. That's the original. And this is the one I made. So you can tell a lot higher. Again, reverb and fast delay. So if we just mute everything else but the drums, and we can start on bar 17 where they come in. Remember, it's just these bottom three where the green lights are. That's the drum part. Now if we hear it in context from bar 17, and please forgive my super novice ability on the deluge still, but it is what it is. Okay, so that's where we're at with Deluge and with Undo at the same time. We'll be going more into sequencers and why I chose Deluge and sequencers in general in the next few workshops, but just wanted to give a quick update on Undo.
Hey everybody, Intrepita here, and I thought I'd give a quick little demo of the Cosmos, something I got into my grimy little paws probably about 3 weeks ago. And as we're talking about granular synthesis for this workshop, I figured I'd give a little demo of the granular synthesis side of this, and then I would branch into maybe some more of the delays and maybe the giant reverb at the end. So I just have some random settings. So I just have some random settings. And as you can tell, it's kind of a long loop, so there's a gap at the end. If I remember correctly from Lepore's demo, the drift control here controls the size of the grains, and they do go quite large. It's a loop. The drift control controls the size of the grain. And we can make the loop go backwards. The blur control controls the randomness. Let's add some distortion.
you.